Part 2. Ally in the Titanomachy. The war began not with a declaration, but with a regurgitation. Prometheus had seen it coming, of course, had watched the future unfold in his mind's eye 1,000 times before it finally manifested in the world of flesh and divine ichor. He had witnessed Metis, wisdom incarnate, slip the herbs into Kronos' wine. He had foreseen the great Titan's belly rebelling against its impossible contents, the stone that had masqueraded as an infant, Zeus, emerging first, followed by the swallowed children, full grown and burning with the fury of those who had been denied their birthright. The day it actually happened, Prometheus stood upon a mountaintop that would one day be called Olympus, though it bore no name, yet save for the songs the winds sang through its peaks. He watched the sky crack open like an egg, revealing not yolk but the rage of a son, who had been hidden away on Crete, raised on honey and goat's milk, while his father ruled in paranoid majesty. Zeus emerged from his concealment like a storm that had been building since the first cloud ever formed, his eyes containing lightning that had not yet learned its own name. The confrontation between father and son shook the pillars that held the sky separate from the earth. Their meeting was not a battle, not yet, but something worse, a recognition. Kronos, Lord of Time, seeing in his son's eyes all the futures he had swallowed his children to prevent. Zeus, youngest and oldest of his siblings, understanding in that moment that patricide was not merely his destiny, but his definition, the act that would make him who he was meant to be. Between that first moment of recognition and the war that followed, came a period that mortals would later forget, but which burned itself into the memory of every immortal who lived through it: the mustering. Both sides gathered their forces, called upon old alliances, made promises that would echo through eternity, and prepared for a conflict that would either establish a new order or confirm the old one forever. Prometheus watched it all with the terrible clarity of one who sees not just what is happening, but what must happen. He saw his father, Iapetus, stand with his brother Titans, taking his place in the battle lines that were forming across the cosmos. He saw Atlas, his beloved brother, hefting boulders the size of mountains, preparing to rain destruction upon the young gods. He saw Menoetius sharpening his rage into a weapon that could cut through divine flesh as easily as mortal clay. And he saw Epimetheus, confused and frightened, following the others because that was what one did. Family stood with family, even unto the ending of the world. The choosing of sides was not a simple matter for most. The cosmos had been divided among the Titans for so long that many could not imagine any other arrangement. They had parceled out creation like a feast, each taking their portion. Sky and earth, sun and moon, memory and justice, the deeps of the ocean and the heights of the air. To stand against them seemed not merely rebellion but madness, a denial of the fundamental order of existence. Yet Zeus had advantages beyond his thunderbolt, that weapon forged for him by the Cyclopes, whom he had freed from their imprisonment in Tartarus. He had the fury of the unjustly swallowed, the rage of siblings who had spent their childhoods in the dark of their father's belly. He had Poseidon with his earth-shaker, Hades with his helm of invisibility, Hestia with her quiet flame that could burn even in the void, Demeter with her connection to the bones of the earth, Hera with her sovereign fury. But most importantly, he had the promise of change, the suggestion that the cosmos need not always be as it had been. that sons need not forever bow to fathers, that power might flow in directions other than down from the ancient heights. It was this promise that drew Prometheus to that first secret council of the Olympians. He came cloaked in mist and shadow, using arts he had learned in his wanderings through the borderlands of creation. The young gods started when he appeared among them, this son of Iapetus, this Titan-born prophet, whose allegiance should have been as fixed as the stars, which themselves were not yet fixed, but wandered the sky like sheep without a shepherd. Zeus regarded him with eyes that held suspicion and hope in equal measure. Here was either a spy or an advantage he had not anticipated. The god who would be king had inherited his father's paranoia along with his power, and he searched Prometheus's face for signs of deception, for the telltale marks of a trap being laid. But Prometheus met his gaze with that calm certainty that came from having seen this moment approach from 1,000 different angles, having watched all the ways it might unfold, and having chosen, with full knowledge of the consequences, to stand where he now stood. The words Prometheus spoke in that council would later be forgotten by most who heard them, overwhelmed as they were by the events that followed. But Zeus remembered. Zeus always remembered the moment when the tide of his war turned from possibility to certainty, when victory transformed from hope to destiny. Prometheus did not speak of battle tactics or divine weapons, of strategies for assault or defense. Instead, he spoke of the nature of time itself, of how Kronos' power over temporality was both his greatest strength and his fatal weakness. For Kronos, master of time, had become trapped within it. His consumption of his children had been an attempt to stop time's flow, to prevent the future from arriving. But in doing so, he had made himself rigid, predictable, bound to patterns that Prometheus could read like words written in the air. The Titan of time had become enslaved to time, while Zeus and his siblings, having existed outside of normal temporality in their father's belly, were free from its constraints in ways that could be exploited. More than tactical advantages, though, Prometheus brought to the Olympians something far more valuable: legitimacy. His defection from the Titans' cause sent ripples through the divine community. If the son of Iapetus, gifted with foresight, chose to stand with the young gods, what did he see that others did not? What future had he glimpsed that made him willing to stand against his own father, his own brothers, his own kind? The war itself, when it finally erupted in full, was unlike anything that had come before or would come after. It was not merely a conflict between beings, but between different concepts of what existence should be. The Titans fought to maintain the cosmos as it was, primal, direct, governed by simple principles of strength and precedence. The Olympians fought for complexity, for a universe of subtle interconnections, where power might manifest in forms other than raw force. Mountains walked in those days, striding across the earth on legs of stone to strike at their enemies. Seas rose up in walls that touched the sky, only to be shattered by winds that had taken solid form. The boundary between earth and sky dissolved as the combatants hurled pieces of creation at each other, with no regard for the distinctions that normally kept the elements separate. Stars fell like rain, and new ones were born from the clash of divine weapons, their light adding to the chaos of a war that recognized no difference between day and night. Prometheus fought, but not as the others fought. where Zeus hurled lightning and Kronos wielded the scythe that had once castrated Uranos, where Atlas threw mountains and Poseidon summoned tsunamis from seas that did not yet exist. Prometheus fought with knowledge. He would appear at crucial moments to whisper warnings of ambushes that had not yet been laid. He would redirect attacks with single words that revealed weaknesses in formations that seemed impregnable. He moved through the battlefield like a ghost of future victories, ensuring that what he had foreseen would come to pass. But it was not easy for him, this betrayal of blood for the sake of vision. Each time he faced one of his brothers across the battlefield, something within him broke that could never be fully mended. Atlas, magnificent Atlas, caught him once in those mighty hands that could crush mountains to powder, and for a moment, the two brothers simply looked at each other. Atlas's eyes held hurt and confusion. Why had Prometheus chosen thus? What had he seen that made him turn against his own? Prometheus could not explain, not in the midst of battle, not in terms that Atlas would understand. How could he convey the vision he had seen of the world under Zeus's rule? Not perfect, far from it, but complex and beautiful in its imperfection. How could he describe the race of beings he had glimpsed in potential, creatures of clay and divine breath who would exist only if Zeus prevailed? How could he make Atlas understand that sometimes one must choose the future over the past, even when the past contained everything one had ever loved? The moment passed. Atlas, with tears of liquid gold streaming down his face, hurled his brother toward the earth with such force that Prometheus's impact created a crater that would later become a lake sacred to memory. But Prometheus rose from that impact, broken but unbroken, and continued his subtle work of ensuring Zeus's victory. The encounter with Menoetius was different. All fury and fire, rage meeting foreknowledge in a clash that lasted 3 days and 3 nights. Menoetius could not touch his prescient brother, who always stepped aside at precisely the right moment. But neither could Prometheus bring himself to strike back with full force. They danced around each other in a combat that was as much grief as anger, until finally Zeus himself intervened, striking Menoetius with a thunderbolt that sent him plummeting into Tartarus, down to the depths where light had never reached and never would. Prometheus felt that blow as if it had struck him instead. To see something coming did not diminish its pain when it arrived. If anything, the anticipation made it worse, like watching a wound approach in slow motion, unable to prevent it, only to brace for the inevitable agony. With Epimetheus, there was no battle at all. Dear, foolish Epimetheus, who understood what was happening only after it had already occurred, stood in the midst of the cosmic conflict, with the bewildered expression of one who had arrived late to a conversation and could not quite grasp the topic. When he finally encountered Prometheus on the battlefield, he simply asked with heartbreaking innocence, "Brother, what are we doing? Why are we fighting?" Prometheus embraced him then, there in the midst of the war that was tearing reality apart, and whispered words that Epimetheus would only understand much later. After Pandora, after the jar, after hope remained trapped while all evils flew free, we are fighting, my beloved brother, to determine whether the future will be allowed to exist. The war raged for 10 years, as mortals would later count time, though in truth, time itself became unreliable during the conflict. There were moments that lasted centuries and aeons that passed in heartbeats. Kronos, in his desperation, began to fracture temporality itself, creating loops and paradoxes, moments where effects preceded causes, where warriors found themselves fighting battles they had already won or lost. It was Prometheus who provided the solution to this temporal chaos. In a council of war held in a moment stolen from time, a bubble of stability in the midst of chronological storm, he proposed the strategy that would ultimately end the conflict. The hundred-handed ones, the Hecatonchires, and the Cyclopes remained imprisoned in Tartarus, where Kronos had cast them. Free them, Prometheus counseled, and their gratitude would manifest as weapons capable of ending even a Titan's immortal existence. Zeus was hesitant. The Hecatonchires were chaos incarnate, beings so terrible that even the Titans feared them. To release them might be to trade one disaster for another. But Prometheus had seen the futures spreading from this choice, and in all the ones where Zeus emerged victorious, the hundred-handed ones stood by his side. The descent into Tartarus to free these primordial beings was a journey that marked all who undertook it. Zeus led the expedition himself, accompanied by Prometheus and his brothers. The path to the deepest depths of existence led through realms where matter had not yet decided what it wanted to be, where the very concept of substance was still under negotiation. They passed through forests of crystallized screams, crossed rivers of liquid darkness that remembered nothing and forgot everything, climbed down cliffs made from the discarded possibilities of creation. When they finally reached the prison of the Hecatonchires, what they found there defied even divine comprehension. Beings with 50 heads and 100 hands each, chained with bonds forged from the concept of imprisonment itself. Their gratitude upon being freed was terrible to behold, a joy so intense it threatened to shatter the very foundations of Tartarus. The Cyclopes, freed alongside their hundred-handed brethren, immediately set to work forging weapons for their liberators. For Zeus, the thunderbolt, not merely lightning, but the very principle of divine authority made manifest as destructive power. For Poseidon, the trident that could shake the foundations of existence. For Hades, the helm of invisibility that granted dominion over all that was hidden. But for Prometheus, who had made their freedom possible, the Cyclopes forged something different. Not a weapon, but a gift of another kind. A small, eternal flame that could never be extinguished, never consumed, never diminished no matter how much it gave of itself. They pressed it into his hands with their massive fingers, speaking words in the first language ever spoken. For the one who sees ahead, a light that will burn through all darkness, past and future. Prometheus held that flame and saw in it something that even the Cyclopes had not intended, the seed of possibility for beings not yet created, a gift he would one day steal and give away, though the cost would be terrible beyond imagining. The return from Tartarus marked the turning point of the war. With the Hecatonchires hurling mountains by the hundred, with weapons forged in the depths of existence itself, the Olympians began to push back the titanic forces. The old order, for all its strength, could not stand against the combined might of the new gods and the primordial powers they had freed. Prometheus stood with Zeus on the day the war reached its climax, the day Kronos himself took the field for the final battle. The The Titan of Time came armed with the same scythe he had used to castrate his own father, Uranos, the blade that had separated sky from earth and begun the cycle of succession that was now reaching its next iteration. Around him, time distorted, creating a field where past and future collided, where warriors aged to dust in seconds or were reduced to infancy, where battles that had been fought were unfought and refought simultaneously. But Prometheus had prepared Zeus for this. In the quiet moments before the battle, he had whispered to the young god the secret of defeating Kronos, not through strength or speed, but through acceptance. Kronos' power came from his control over time, but that control was rooted in fear, in the desperate need to prevent the future from arriving. If Zeus could accept all possibilities, embrace both victory and defeat simultaneously, he would become immune to his father's temporal manipulations. The battle between father and son was both eternal and instantaneous. They fought across all moments simultaneously, their conflict rippling backward and forward through time, creating echoes that would manifest as thunderstorms throughout all of history. In the end, it was not Zeus's thunderbolt that defeated Kronos, nor was it strength or cunning. It was the simple, inevitable truth that Prometheus had seen from the beginning, that time itself demands change, that fathers must yield to sons, that the old must make way for the new. Kronos fell, not dead, for how can time die, but diminished, bound, cast into Tartarus with those titans who had stood with him. Iapetus went with them, and as he was dragged down to the depths, his eyes met those of his son who had betrayed him. In that gaze was neither forgiveness nor condemnation, only a terrible sadness, and perhaps, just perhaps, a glimmer of understanding. Atlas alone, among Prometheus's brothers, avoided Tartarus, though his fate was hardly better. Zeus, in his first act as king of the cosmos, condemned him to hold up the sky itself, to stand at the western edge of the world and bear the weight of the heavens on those mighty shoulders that had once thrown mountains like pebbles. It was Prometheus who had suggested this punishment, not from cruelty, but from mercy. Better an eternal burden than eternal imprisonment. Better to remain part of the world, even in suffering, than to be cast out of it entirely. When Atlas took up his burden, Prometheus was there. The brothers stood face to face one last time, and Atlas, straining under the newfound weight, managed to speak. "You saw this, didn't you? From the beginning, you saw where we would end." Prometheus could only nod, tears of liquid starlight running down his immortal face. "Was there no other way?" Atlas asked, his voice already beginning to take on the timeless quality of mountains, of things that endure beyond reason. "There were 1,000 other ways," Prometheus replied, his gift of foresight for once a curse rather than a blessing. "But in all of them, the cost was higher. In all of them, more was lost." "And what of your cost, brother?" Atlas asked, settling into his eternal stance, his feet already beginning to merge with the bedrock beneath them. "What price will you pay for choosing tomorrow over today?" Prometheus looked away, toward a future Atlas could not see, toward a mountain in the Caucasus where chains waited, where an eagle circled patiently, where his own eternal suffering was already approaching with the inexorability of dawn. "That price," he said softly, "has not yet been named, but I have seen it, and I choose it still." The aftermath of the Titanomachy, was a time of restructuring, of establishing the new order that would govern the cosmos until the end of days, or at least until the next revolution. For Prometheus had seen that too in the distant futures, though he kept that knowledge to himself. Zeus claimed the sky and sovereignty, Poseidon the seas, Hades the underworld. The other Olympians received their domains and honors, their places in the pantheon that would rule over all creation. But what place was there for Prometheus in this new order? He was neither Olympian nor Titan, neither victor nor vanquished. He had betrayed his own kind for the sake of a future only he could see, had ensured Zeus's victory while knowing, for he knew everything, that the new king would one day become his tormentor. The other gods looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. He had proven his loyalty, yes, but he had also proven his capacity for betrayal. If he could turn against his own father and brothers, what guarantee was there that he would not someday turn against them? Zeus, flush with victory, but already feeling the paranoia that comes with power, appointed Prometheus to a unique position, counselor and craftsman, shaper of what was to come. It was both honor and exile, both reward and punishment. Prometheus would help build the new world, but he would never fully belong to it. He would stand forever at the margin between what was and what would be, trusted and mistrusted in equal measure. In those early days of the new order, as the cosmos slowly healed from the wounds of war, Prometheus threw himself into his appointed tasks. He helped establish the cycles that would govern the world, the progression of seasons, the rhythm of day and night, the patterns of stars that would guide future navigators across seas not yet sailed. But always, in the back of his mind, was the knowledge of what was coming, the vision that had driven him to side with Zeus in the first place. For Prometheus had seen them, those beings of clay and breath, those impossible creatures balanced between matter and spirit, between animal instinct and divine aspiration. Mortals, humans, the race that did not yet exist, but whose potential hummed in the very foundations of creation like a song waiting to be sung. He had seen their cities and their sorrows, their triumphs and their tragedies, their brief lives burning bright as candles in the cosmic dark. And he had seen himself giving them the gift that would make it all possible, the theft that would define both their nature and his fate. Fire. Not just the physical flame, but the spark of consciousness, the light of knowledge, the warmth of civilization. He had seen himself reaching into the very hearth of Olympus and stealing what the gods would hoard. And he had seen the price, the chains, the eagle, the eternal agony. But he had also seen what would happen without that gift. Humanity stillborn, potential unrealized, the cosmos remaining forever static in its divine perfection, unchanging, and ultimately meaningless. For what was the point of power without something to power over? What was the purpose of gods without worshippers? What was the value of perfection without the possibility of growth, of becoming, of transcendence earned rather than inherited? These thoughts occupied Prometheus as he worked alongside the Olympians to establish their new kingdom. He helped Hephaestus design his forge, teaching him secrets of fire that even the smith god had not imagined. He aided Athena in her works of craft and wisdom, showing her patterns that existed not in matter, but in thought itself. He even assisted Zeus in understanding the complexities of rulership, though always carefully, always withholding just enough knowledge to maintain the illusion that the thunder god's wisdom was his own. But it was in the quiet moments, when the other gods were distracted by their pleasures and their politics, that Prometheus began his true work. In hidden valleys and secret glades, in places where divine eyes rarely turned, he began to experiment with the clay that would one day become flesh, with the breath that would one day become consciousness. He was preparing for a creation that he knew Zeus would initially oppose, laying the groundwork for a theft that was not really theft, but rather the fulfillment of a promise that existence had made to itself at the moment of its birth.